Hi, this is Julia Walker with Grey Duck Forge, and today we're going to be continuing our hoof structures video series, talking about the lamina in the hoof. And the lamina have a lot of interesting things about them, so we're going to kind of break it apart into the 4 sections, talking about the purpose of the lamina, their structure, how they're formed, and problems that can arise regarding them. They are definitely one of the coolest structures in the feet, and there's a lot to say about them, and this will still just be a beginner type level based on like certification goals and just sort of like what a farrier should know about the lamina. Hopefully we'll try and cover like get a good coverage of the basics on this stuff. So talking about the purpose of the lamina, the main purpose is to suspend that coffin bone. So we're connecting the sides of the coffin bone to the hoof wall. It's not an up and down connection, but a side to side connection. And that means when we're suspending the coffin bone, we're also suspending the whole horse up by the sides of the coffin bone, which is kind of cool. And on paper, like when you first think about it, it doesn't really make sense. Like, why wouldn't it just all be cemented together in a really strong way? Which like it kind of is. But the way that it works this way is shockingly efficient. So it's kind of cool. It forms a flexible connection between 2 hard things. So connecting bone to hoof wall, and then the lamina themselves are flexible, which is really cool. They're also increasing the surface area of that attachment to the hoof wall. The more surface area, if pressure is force per unit area, if you increase the number you're dividing things by, you're making the overall pressure smaller. So increase the area, then you'll decrease the pressure. So by having a really big surface area, the lamina are decreasing the pressure that the horse is putting onto its own feet. So if you're looking at like the bottom of a horse's foot, it's probably on an average horse not much more than a quarter of a square foot, right? If you're thinking 1 foot by 1 foot, divide that into 4 pieces, that's probably bigger than your average foot. Your average hoof, I should say, now that we're using the word foot here and there. But the surface area of the lamina is about 8 square feet per hoof, which is an insanely large number. 8 feet by 8 feet crammed into, like, squiggled up and crammed into the perimeter of the coffin bone. Crazy. So all that square footage is helping dissipate force in the foot, and it makes a stronger bond also between the bone and the hoof wall, like Velcro upon Velcro. The ultimate Velcro is biological Velcro, as we all know. So also the white line, which is like the continuation of the lamina but down into the dead zone of the hoof, distal to the coffin bone, is showing us a projection of the perimeter of the coffin bone, and that is helpful for us to know when we're nailing shoes onto feet, right? Since we're aiming for the white line as the entry point of the nail, then knowing that if our nail holes are center of stock in our shoe and our shoe fits, then our nail holes are going to go into our white line as long as we chose an appropriate section of steel for the foot. And so basically that white line, if we fit the white line of the foot, we're probably fitting what that horse needs pretty well, provided they don't have something wrong with them that we need to modify with our fitting. So that is also a helpful, it's not an intended purpose maybe of the lamina, but for farriers, it's a really helpful thing about the lamina is that they're forming the white line, which helps us fit feet. So very functional. Here's sort of what I was talking about it being suspended in midair. You've got your sensitive lamina that in pink and their insensitive lamina in the lighter yellow. And they're interlocked on either side together, and together they are velcroing your coffin bone to your hoof wall, which if you think of the insensitive lamina as like an extension of the hoof wall, like a part, the innermost layer of the hoof wall, then you can kind of see how they all just kind of glue together and form a little bit of a bridge there. So this is a really cool video. Turn the volume off. A really cool video that Root and Riddle posted on their Facebook page, but it was coming from Dr. Scott Pleasant, and he's got the coffin bone on the left side there, hoof wall on the right side, and the lamina in between being all flexible and cool. Obviously, like, it's a soft structure, and so the sensitive lamina you would expect to be flexible, but this video does a cool job of showing that the insensitive lamina are also pretty flexible, probably because they're so close to that, like, bloody tissue that they have a really high moisture content, and that keeps things soft and squishy. So it's cool, but it allows, like, the most flexible bit to be probably, like, the wettest part of the lamina, versus, like, it probably gets drier as it goes out, and so it's, like, more flexible here than it is over here. And it's just cool. Makes everything dissipate evenly. Very functional. Very awesome. In regards to the structure of the lamina, there's a picture of some lamina there. You've got your coronary corium up here that they kind of brushed out to make it more obvious, make you be able to see everything a little better. But your lamina then are covering that coffin bone hiding underneath, and they're starting just below that coronary corium, and they are highly vascular, a lot of blood involved in the sensitive lamina. So if there are issues with the blood supply, there's going to be issues with that laminar connection. And the insensitive lamina are interlocking with your sensitive lamina as we're going around, and creating that Velcro bond. Interdigitate is another word that gets used a lot, describing how the lamina connect with each other. So don't be overwhelmed by that word. It should be, there are ways to memorize this word, and the first way that I think of is your fingers are your digits. So think of digital age, everybody's typing on their phone with their digits, right? So digital, fingertips, right? World at our fingertips. And if you interlock your fingers, then you are interdigitating your digits. So interdigitate, think of your digits, your fingers, interlock them. That's what the lamina are doing. Perfect. In this diagram, the pink stuff are the sensitive lamina, and the white stuff is insensitive stuff. You know, your coffin bone is over here, and the outside of your hoof wall is over here. Not to scale. But another important topic that we talk about are these primary and secondary lamina. So the primary lamina are going to be the big pieces. So there are primary sensitive lamina and primary insensitive lamina. And then the secondary lamina are going to be the little pieces. That's going to be a secondary lamina, and this one's going to be a secondary lamina. There are primary and secondary sensitive and insensitive lamina, because the insensitive lamina are just being formed in between all of the sensitive stuff. So if your papilla are up here forming your horn tubules up at the coronary band, then the intertubular horn that they're growing between the tubules is just filling in the gaps between the primary and secondary lamina of the sensitive lamina. And I know those were a lot of big words, but hopefully you're following. When I'm talking primary and secondary lamina too, another way that I use to describe it is like in kindergarten, if you drew that snowflake and you showed it to your friend, you know how kindergartners are, or maybe you remember yourself as a kindergartner. Maybe you didn't draw, but just imagine. If you showed your friend, like, hey, I can draw a snowflake, can you? And you showed them that, and they were like, yeah, I can draw a snowflake. Here, check this out. And they whipped this bad boy out on you. Whew. I mean, you're looking at your snowflake and thinking your snowflake's super basic, and your friend's is, like, way cooler and more complicated. There's so much more detail. This is fantastic. Don't judge. I know these both look terrible, but the primary lamina, the most basic lamina, are kind of like your primary legs of your snowflake. Basic. And the primary lamina in horses' hooves are the stuff that we can see. It's just basic. It's not as big and, or it's not as small and hard to see. Versus, like, these little guys, the details, those are secondary. So it doesn't have anything to do with sensitive or insensitive. It's just the primary ones are the ones that you can see with your eyeballs. Like when you're trimming, you can see the primary insensitive lamina pretty readily. whereas the secondary ones you can only usually see under a microscope or like in a really high definition, super zoomed in picture with a really clean cut in a dissection, then you might be able to see the secondary ones. But usually all that we can visibly see are the primary ones. So also, the other thing to note with this diagram is the black squiggly line that connects the secondary lamina, really, of the sensitive and insensitive lamina. That line is what is referred to as the basement membrane. And it's just the membrane that connects the sensitive and the insensitive lamina. So it's just the connective region, and that is all. So just another fun fact, a good word for you to burn into your brain. When you think of the basement membrane, just think of the lamina. Best advice I can give you. Okay. Talking then about the formation of the lamina. The sensitive lamina are growing off of P3, that's something that happens before the horse is born, whatever, that's like a fleshy tissue being grown off of a bone. Who cares? We're farriers, we don't care about that stuff. But the insensitive lamina, being like kind of that innermost layer of the hoof wall, they are being formed up at the coronary band and growing down the lamina basically, and sliding down the insensitive lamina as they go. Because they are growing down with the hoof wall. So I know when we talk about choria, I should say, plural, when we're talking about the white line, it's easy to get confused about this because we say that the white line is growing off the terminal papilla of the sensitive lamina, but the white line is also like kind of a lot of it is made up of the insensitive lamina. So what gives, right? When we're talking about the white line, something that is important to note is that the white line only exists distal to the coffin bone. Like, it doesn't, like, the region up here, if I get my pen to work, this squiggly region where the lamina are connecting with each other, that we're talking about the sensitive lamina, we're talking about the insensitive lamina, we're talking about the coffin bone and the hoof wall, but we're not talking about the white line up there because the white line doesn't exist up there. All of the components of the white line aren't formed until you get to that region right at the tip of the coffin bone where those terminal papilla of the sensitive lamina, so little papilla growing off the bottoms of the sensitive lamina, are producing a connective horn that's filling in the gaps between the insensitive lamina. So normally growing down the hoof, you've got your coffin bone here and your sensitive lamina, and then you've got your insensitive lamina in between them. But then once you grow down and all of your sensitive lamina are gone, then there's a gap there, and the foot has come up with the genius idea to fill it in with some other connective tissue. Instead of having the sensitive lamina there anymore. Instead of having holes in the feet, they just decided to fill it in because holes are bad. So, for the most part. So the white line isn't finished until you have that connective tissue and the insensitive lamina involved. So the white line is only formed after the terminal papilla of the sensitive lamina. So that's why we say the corium of the white line is the terminal papilla of the sensitive lamina, and isn't the coronary corium where the insensitive lamina are growing. So just always remember, white line is coming off the terminal papilla of the sensitive lamina, but the insensitive lamina do go up higher than that, but that's just a part of the white line, so it's not the white line itself. Cool. Problems with the lamina, laminitis, first and foremost. That is the main issue with the lamina. We aren't going to go into extreme detail on laminitis today because that would just be silly to do. It's beyond the scope of this video, but I will make a video about it at some point. But that is the main one. I will also mention, though, that distortion can be a thing. So if you've got like a club foot, that's going to mess up the lamina on any of the affected structures. Or if you've got like a wry foot, which is going to look actually really similar, but imagine you're looking from the front this time, and this is the medial wall that's tucked under, this is the lateral that's flared out. this is going to be a super, like, compressed and smashed white line in here, and this is going to be super stretched out. So club feet, neglect, problems to the coffin bone, like an infected coffin bone, crenna at the toe of the coffin bone will distort the white line up at the toe. That's sort of, when you've got that dip in the white line. But usually that's usually visible as a problem with the coffin bone, but it affects the lamina too. And then, like, if a keratoma comes down and does some pressure resorption of the coffin bone, then there'll be some messing up of the lamina where that happens as well. And also, if you're shoeing a horse and you stick them and you get a hot nail, or you quick the horse, depending on what term you use, that is probably, hopefully not in the coffin bone, but it's probably affecting the lamina. So whether they're sore for a little bit or they are sore for a long time, that's probably, we're talking an issue with the lamina, most likely. Or it could be the sole corium too, but we'll assume that it's the lamina. So I did say I would mention some things about laminitis because it's important, and we're talking about the lamina, so I literally can't not mention it. The main thing I will say is it's good to know from a basic level that the three different terms that kind of float around regarding laminitis. So acute laminitis, number one, that's like everything is bad, code red, everything is falling apart. So that's when you're on the phone with the vet, you're doing ice baths with horses' feet, you're trying to stop the inflammation in its tracks and minimize the amount of damage that's being done to the horse's hooves. So, and the lamina themselves. If a horse, has laminitis or has had laminitis, it's usually meaning that they had a bout of that acute laminitis. And the horse is now, like, they're managing the horse, living with that diagnosis, trying to figure out what works for that horse, trying to prevent another onset of a phase of acute laminitis. So if a horse has laminitis, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're in that acute phase, but maybe that it could mean that, but it could also mean that they're just kind of managing having gone through that. Versus if a horse is foundered or has chronic founder, usually we're talking permanent damage like rotation or sinking, and chronic founder would be like multiple episodes of laminitis. So like they keep getting it due to neglect or improper management or a weird series of events. That would be like chronic founder, and chronic meaning happening a lot over time, and founder meaning like that things have moved, the damage is done. So as farriers, things that we can do, I'm listing them. I am not saying do all of these things for a horse, but some things that can be done might be trimming the feet to, reduce leverage. Like if a horse has super ski hooves, that's, step one is trim a hoof into that thing. So that could be something that could be done right away to help alleviate some of their symptoms, but they'll probably be sore while you're doing it, but it might be necessary. Something like putting shoes on after the inflammation is gone, then, pounding on their feet won't be such a big issue for the horse. So you could nail some shoes on and maybe put like a bar shoe on or a reverse shoe or a heart bar or something with a lot of breakover in it, just so that you're not adding a lot of leverage to that laminar connection at the toe, which is usually the main problem with laminitis. Clogs might be something you could put on during that acute phase when the horse can barely stand to be trimmed, and certainly wouldn't be able to have like a shoe with a pad put on. Then you could try like sliding a shoe under the foot and screwing it onto the hoof wall, with whatever. Doing a nice set of clogs could be helpful. Boots will sometimes work well, especially if the owners don't have access to a farrier that can do any of those things. You can chuck some boots on, hopefully they fit really well, and get the horse trimmed as soon as they're comfortable. Sometimes that's the best option. Frog support usually helps. And sometimes I've seen vets do it where they'll just tape like foam boards to feet, and that's a really good like emergency whatever, like get some cushion on there, get some of those other support structures involved, so it's not all like just the hoof wall holding the horse up on some hard ground, like getting everything squishy. That helps a lot. So there's some things about laminitis. So in summary, the lamina are that flexible connection between the coffin bone and the hoof wall, and they have a really high surface area to help dissipate force. So you've got your dermal and your epidermal lamina, your sensitive and your insensitive lamina, and they are connected via that basement membrane. It's a good word, good term to know. That connection between the lamina, sensitive and insensitive. You got the word interdigitate. Just interlock your digits, your fingers, and you'll know what we're talking about, what the lamina are doing. And then remember the difference between a primary and a secondary lamina. On both there are those on both the sensitive and insensitive lamina, so that's good to know. And there are about 60,000 secondary lamina of each kind per hoof. It's a good number to, I don't know, it just kind of helps you understand the scale of everything. The insensitive lamina are growing from the coronary corium, and they're sliding down the sensitive lamina along with the hoof wall. But the white line itself isn't finished being formed until the spaces between those insensitive lamina are being filled in by the terminal papilla of the sensitive lamina. So white line, remember, it's this terminal papilla of the sensitive lamina. That's what its corium is. But the insensitive lamina that are a component of the white line are being formed higher up. Cool. So that's where we're going to leave it for the lamina as a hoof structure. So thank you for joining me on this little adventure. We will continue with the hoof structure series with what I believe will be the last video, meaning the cushions of the hoof. So we'll talk about fibro-fatty cartilaginous structures in the hoof, and, other similar cushiony structures. So thank you for tagging along. If you have any feedback whatsoever, chuck it in the comments. Happy to answer any questions, or I'd love to hear any corrections or otherwise. If you want to share any resources about lamina or laminitis or whatever, chuck it in there. Do what you want. Otherwise, stay tuned for more.